Most people don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because they're studying the wrong evidence. Society hands you a clean, polished story. Follow the winners. Copy what worked. Study the successful. And if you do, you'll succeed too. That's the lie. Because you are not studying reality, you are studying the survivors.
You see Steve Jobs. You don't see the thousands of Jobs clones who dressed the same, spoke the same, took the same risks, and vanished into debt, irrelevance, and quiet humiliation. You see the billionaire who never gave up. You don't see the people who never gave up and died in mediocrity anyway. You see the soldier who returned from war. You don't see the ones who didn't. And here's the danger. If you only learn from the survivors, you don't learn how to win. You learn how to justify gambling. This is the logic flaw that ruins careers, destroys relationships, and turns intelligent people into obedient disciples of luck. It has a name, survivorship bias. And once you see it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. In business, in fitness, in love, in politics, even in your own self-image. Because the human mind is designed to worship outcomes, not probabilities. Tonight, we're going to dissect this bias like an autopsy. We'll start with the wartime discovery that exposed it. Then we'll go into the neuroscience that makes you vulnerable to it. Then we'll expose how modern society weaponizes it. And finally, I'll give you a protocol, a ruthless way to think that makes you harder to deceive, harder to manipulate, harder to ruin. Welcome to UmbraDecode. The story begins in war, and war is always honest. Not because war is moral, but because war is measurable. In World War II, Allied forces had a problem. Bombers were returning from missions riddled with bullet holes. The planes were damaged, some barely holding together, but they were coming back. So military analysts did what analysts always do. They collected data. They examined the returning aircraft and mapped where the bullets hit most often. The conclusion seemed obvious. Armor the areas with the most bullet holes. Reinforce the wings. Reinforce the tail. Reinforce the rear fuselage. It was logical. It was evidence-based. It was also wrong, because the planes you're looking at are the ones that survived. The missing data was the aircraft that never came back. The planes that were shot down didn't get studied. They didn't get measured. They didn't get turned into neat diagrams. They became smoke and metal over the ocean. And then a mathematician named Abraham Wald looked at the same data and saw what everyone else missed. Wald said, "You don't armor where the planes are hit. You armor where the planes are not hit." Because the planes returning with bullet holes in the wings means they can take wing damage and still survive. But if the planes are returning with almost no bullet holes in the engine or cockpit or fuel system, that doesn't mean those areas are safe. It means if they get hit there, the plane doesn't return. That was the moment survivorship bias was exposed in its purest form. A deadly mistake created by studying only what remains visible, not what was destroyed. And this is exactly how modern people think about success. They look at the winners and mistake their survival for proof of correctness. They look at the entrepreneur who dropped out of college and became rich and forget the million dropouts who became broke. They look at the celebrity relationship that just worked and ignore the thousands that collapsed behind closed doors. They look at the investor who got lucky at the right time and call it genius. Survivorship bias doesn't just distort reality, it manufactures false prophets. Because when you only study survivors, you don't learn what works. You learn what didn't kill them. And those are not the same thing.
Survivorship bias isn't just a cultural error. It's a biological weakness. Your brain did not evolve to calculate reality like a statistician. It evolved to keep you alive in a hostile environment, using shortcuts, fast judgments, pattern recognition. And one of the most dangerous shortcuts is this. The brain confuses visibility with importance. If something is visible, it feels real. If something is invisible, it feels irrelevant. This is why myths survive longer than facts, because myths come with faces, names, stories, heroes, and your brain is addicted to heroes. Not because you're childish, but because stories compress complexity into something your nervous system can digest.
Survivorship bias isn't just a cultural error. It's a biological weakness. Your brain did not evolve to calculate reality like a statistician. It evolved to keep you alive in a hostile environment, using shortcuts, fast judgments. Neuroscience calls this the availability heuristic. If you can recall an example easily, you assume it must be common. If you can remember a success story vividly, you assume it must be replicable. But what's available in your memory is not what's statistically accurate. It's what was emotionally loud, what was repeated, what was rewarded with attention. That's why one viral success story can warp the ambitions of millions.
Survivorship bias isn't just a cultural error. Now add another weakness. Your brain is not built to respect probability. It is built to respect narrative causality. Meaning, if you see an outcome, you instinctively assume there was a clear chain of causes that produced it. And if you identify those causes, you think you can recreate the outcome. This is how humans become superstitious. This is how gamblers are born. This is how people confuse correlation with destiny. In psychology, this is connected to illusory correlation and hindsight bias, the belief that once something happened, it was always going to happen. And that belief is intoxicating because it makes the universe feel controllable.
But survivorship bias is more brutal than superstition because it hides the bodies. It deletes the counterexamples. It removes the evidence that would stop you from romanticizing risk. And that's where dopamine comes in. Your brain rewards you for hope, not for accuracy. Dopamine isn't just pleasure, it's motivation. It's anticipation. It's the chemical that says, go toward that. So when you see someone who made it, your brain releases fuel. Your brain says, that could be you. And the cost of that motivation is blindness. Because dopamine doesn't care about the invisible graveyard behind the winner. It only cares that the winner exists.
But survivorship bias is more brutal than superstition. Because it hides the bodies. It deletes the counterexamples. It removes the evidence that would stop you from romanticizing risk. This is why intelligent people fall for survivorship bias harder than average people. Because intelligence can become a weapon used to justify desire. You don't just want the outcome, you want to believe the outcome is earned. So you reverse engineer the winner's story and call it principles. But most success stories are not principles. They are biographies written by luck, edited by ego, and sold as certainty.
Survivorship bias is the brain's way of saying, if someone survived this path, then the path must be safe. But reality doesn't work like that. Survival is not proof. It's just survival.
In the modern world, survivorship bias isn't an accident, it's a business model. Because attention is a currency, and winners are more profitable than truth. Think about what your feed shows you. It doesn't show you the average outcome, it shows you the extreme outcome, the outlier, the miracle. Because miracles sell.
You're not watching reality. You're watching the highlight reel of human existence. And that creates a psychological distortion. You start believing the world is filled with winners because the losers aren't broadcast. They're not monetizable. They're not aspirational. They're not content. So they disappear. The modern world filters reality like a lens until you are living inside a curated hallucination, a hallucination where everyone is rich, everyone is attractive, everyone is traveling, everyone is building something. And if you're not, you feel defective. But you're not defective. You're just seeing survivorship bias at scale. Let's take the Steve Jobs example. People study Jobs like scripture. They study his wardrobe, his speaking style, his intensity, his obsession, his brutal perfectionism, and they conclude, this is the blueprint. But they ignored the hidden variables, the timing, the market conditions, the team around him, the competitors who failed, the luck, the cultural moment that made Apple possible. They study the man and ignore the ecosystem, because ecosystems don't fit into a motivational quote. Now look at business advice. The most dangerous advice is always packaged like certainty. Follow your passion, drop out, take massive risks, never work a 9-to-5. This advice survives because the people who failed don't become famous enough to warn you. The graveyard is silent, so the winners dominate the narrative, and humans are story-driven animals, so we obey. The same thing happens in relationships. You hear from the couples who made it. You don't hear from the couples who tried the exact same methods and slowly decayed into resentment. Because nobody posts, Year 7, we are strangers now. Nobody posts, I followed the advice, it still collapsed. So you study the survivors and think you've studied love, but you've only studied the couples who were lucky enough to remain. And then there's the most predatory version, the self-help industry. It sells you the illusion that life is controllable, that if you do the right habits, the right mindset, the right morning routine, you will inevitably win. But survivorship bias is the hidden engine of self-help, because self-help doesn't sell probability, it sells destiny. And destiny is addictive, because destiny removes the terror of randomness. It tells you, if you fail, it's because you didn't do it right, not because the game is rigged, not because the odds were low, not because the world is chaotic. Survivorship bias makes failure feel like sin, and that's how people get trapped. They don't just lose, they blame themselves for losing a game that was never fair. Survivorship bias doesn't just mislead you, it reshapes your entire philosophy of life. It turns you into a worshiper of outcomes. And once you worship outcomes, you start sacrificing sanity to chase them. Here's a cost. First, it makes you overconfident, because you believe the winner's path is replicable. So you take risks without respecting probability. You gamble your savings, you gamble your reputation, you gamble years of your life. And when it doesn't work, you don't just lose money, you lose identity, because you built your self-image around a story that was never statistically sound. Second, it makes you cruel. Because if you believe winners deserve their success, then you believe losers deserve their failure. This is how people justify inequality. This is how people stop feeling empathy. They look at the poor and assume laziness. They look at the depressed and assume weakness. They look at the rejected and assume incompetence. Because survivorship bias teaches you a false moral equation. Success equals virtue, failure equals flaw. But reality is more savage. Sometimes success is just survival. Sometimes failure is just physics. Third, it makes you chase the wrong lessons. You start copying superficial traits, the aesthetic of success, the performance of confidence, the rituals, the quotes, the mindset. But those are often irrelevant. They are like bullet holes in the wings, visible damage that didn't kill the plane. Meanwhile, the real lethal variables are hidden. Timing, networks, capital, health, random opportunity. You can't copy those, so you copy what you can see and call it strategy. That's how survivorship bias turns ambition into cosplay.
Fourth, it keeps you addicted to hope. Not disciplined hope, not rational hope, but compulsive hope. The kind that ignores evidence, the kind that says, maybe I'll be the exception. And that is the most dangerous sentence in the human language, because it makes you tolerate conditions that are killing you. A job that drains you, a relationship that humiliates you, a dream that is statistically suicidal. You stay because you've seen someone survive it, and you mistake survival for permission, networks, capital, health, random opportunity. You can't copy those, so you copy what you can see and call it strategy. That's how survivorship bias turns ambition into cosplay. Survivorship bias ruins your life because it makes you build your decisions on incomplete data, and incomplete data creates complete destruction.
Now, here's the antidote. The solution isn't cynicism. The solution is forensic thinking. You don't stop chasing goals. You stop worshiping survivors. You start thinking like Abraham Wald. Step 1. Study the graveyard. For every success story you admire, find 10 failure stories that tried the same thing. If you can't find them, assume they exist. Because silence is not evidence of absence. Silence is often evidence of deletion. Step 2. Separate skill from variance. Ask, what part of this outcome was controllable, and what part was timing, environment, luck? If you can't separate them, you don't have a strategy. You have a religion. Step 3. Stop copying habits. Start copying constraints. Winners love to talk about routines, but routines are usually decoration. What matters is what they avoided, what they refused, what they sacrificed. The real pattern isn't what did they do, it's what could they afford to do. If someone succeeded taking huge risks, ask what safety net they had. Family money, connections, a strong passport, a healthy body, a second chance. Because risk is not equal for everyone.
Step 4. Think in base rates. Base rates are the average outcomes, not the exceptional ones. If 90% of startups fail, then the correct assumption is failure until proven otherwise. If most people who chase fame burn out, then the correct assumption is burnout until proven otherwise. This doesn't mean you don't try. It means you try with armor on the engine, not on the wings. Step 5. Design for survival first, not success, survival. Your first goal is not to win big. Your first goal is to not be destroyed. This is how real strategy works. This is how empires lasted. This is how generals stayed alive. This is how philosophers stayed sane. You build a life that can absorb failure, because failure is not a possibility, it is a statistical inevitability. So build redundancy, build savings, build skills that transfer, build relationships that are not transactional, build a mind that can take loss without collapsing. Because the truth is, most people don't need better motivation, they need better thinking. And survivorship bias is the infection that turns thinking into fantasy. Survivorship bias is the religion of the modern world. It tells you, if someone made it, then the path is valid. But Wald taught us something colder, something real. The bullet holes you see are not the real danger. The real danger is what you never got to observe because it didn't survive long enough to tell you the truth. So the next time someone hands you a success story, a blueprint, a lifestyle, a doctrine, ask yourself, where are the bodies? Where are the planes that didn't return? Because wisdom isn't found in the survivor. Wisdom is found in the missing evidence. If you want more dossiers like this, more psychological autopsies, more strategy, philosophy, and human nature, subscribe to UmbraDecode. Not for comfort, for clarity.